You've probably seen the headlines screaming about massive data breaches, crippling ransomware attacks, maybe system downtimes that bring entire organizations just to a grinding halt. We hear about them so often, don't we? They almost start to blend together. But what if I told you that many, if not most, of these incidents could have been significantly mitigated or even outright prevented if only organizations had a clearer, more systematic way to manage their security weaknesses before they got exploited? It's easy to think of cybersecurity as, I don't know, building a static, impenetrable fortress, put up a wall, and you're done.
Right.
The truth is, the digital landscape is less like a wall and more like a constantly shifting sand dune. New threats, new vulnerabilities, they pop up constantly, by the hour sometimes. So managing these weaknesses, these fundamental vulnerabilities, it isn't a one-time audit or a yearly checkup. It's a relentless ongoing battle for basically every organization operating in our interconnected digital world. So with that daunting challenge laid bare, the critical first question becomes, how do organizations even begin to tackle such a relentless, evolving threat? Today, we're taking a deep dive into the complex, crucial world of cybersecurity vulnerability management. We're going beyond the headlines to explore the sophisticated systems, the strategic thinking, and maybe some surprising realities behind how organizations identify, assess, prioritize, and respond to this ever-present threat. We'll be drawing from diverse sources, foundational definitions, official frameworks, cutting-edge prioritization strategies, really to equip you with a comprehensive understanding of this hidden battleground. And joining me to help us navigate these intricate layers and hopefully transform complex data into clear insights is our expert guide.
Thanks. And what's fascinating here, or maybe terrifying depending on your perspective, is just the sheer volume of new vulnerabilities discovered daily. It really makes managing them a truly monumental task for any organization, regardless of its size or resources. Think about it. It's not enough to just find the vulnerabilities. The real challenge, the hard part, is making sense of them, understanding their true potential impact in your specific environment, and then making smart, rapid decisions about how to address them quickly. Imagine trying to fix every single leaky pipe in a massive, constantly expanding city simultaneously. It's overwhelming, right? You simply can't fix them all at once. So the core challenge that we'll be exploring throughout this deep dive is precisely that. How do you prioritize effectively when you're faced with an overwhelming, constantly changing number of potential weaknesses, especially when many of them might appear equally severe just on the surface? This deep dive will hopefully offer you a shortcut to understanding these complex answers and the structured, often quite innovative approaches that exist to tackle this seemingly impossible problem.
That makes perfect sense. It's like trying to patch a sinking ship while it's still sailing. So let's start at the beginning then. What exactly is vulnerability management in the cybersecurity world? We hear the term tossed around a lot, but what does it truly encompass?
Well, at its core, you should think of vulnerability management as a continuous cyclical process. It's really not a one-off event. It involves constantly identifying, classifying, prioritizing, remediating, which is just, fixing and mitigating or reducing the risk of software and system vulnerabilities. It's absolutely integral to both computer and network security. And it's crucial to understand that it's fundamentally different from just a simple vulnerability assessment.
Okay, how so? What's the key difference there?
An assessment is like a snapshot in time, maybe like a single doctor's visit. It tells you how things look right now. Vulnerability management, on the other hand, is like ongoing preventative care, and monitoring, it's a continuous, perpetual motion machine designed to keep an organization secure over the long haul.
Got it. So it's the difference between a checkup and continuous health management.
Exactly. And if we zoom out for a moment and look at that bigger picture, the first step in this continuous cycle is always discovery. You have to find the problems first.
Makes sense. But how exactly do organizations find these hidden doors and weak points in their vast, complex systems? Where do they even start looking?
The most common starting point, and arguably the real workhorse here, is using vulnerability scanners. These are basically automated tools that actively analyze computer systems, networks, applications, you name it, searching for known vulnerabilities. They probe for things like open network ports that shouldn't be accessible or insecure software configurations, maybe known susceptibilities to various malware infections. These scanners are the initial front line, really, of a continuous surveillance process. They give security teams a foundational understanding of their exposures.
So scanners find the known stuff. What about information coming from outside the organization?
Good question. Beyond these automated tools, organizations rely heavily on public sources for crucial information. The National Vulnerability Database, or NVD, is a key public repository. It's constantly updated with new vulnerabilities and their technical details. Software vendors themselves also issue specific security updates and advisories directly to their customers. That's a primary channel. And because sifting through all that public information can be, frankly, a full-time job in itself, many organizations also subscribe to commercial alerting services. These provide timely and often curated intelligence on newly discovered weaknesses, sometimes giving more targeted, actionable insights than just the raw public feed.
Okay, so known vulnerabilities from scanners, public databases, vendors, alerting services. But what about the unknown unknowns, the things nobody knows about yet?
Yes. Now here's where it gets particularly challenging. Not all vulnerabilities are immediately known to everyone, especially the vendor who made the software. There's this particularly elusive category often referred to as 0 days. These are weaknesses that attackers might know about and actively exploit before the vendor even realizes they exist, let alone has time to develop and release a patch.
That sounds bad. How do you find something nobody knows is broken yet?
It is bad, and finding them requires more advanced, often cutting-edge methods. It's a different ballgame. One cornerstone technique for finding these kinds of unknown vulnerabilities is called fuzz testing, or sometimes just fuzzing. This basically involves feeding random or sometimes semi-random unexpected input data to programs to try and detect unexpected or abnormal behavior. If the program crashes or acts weirdly, that can be a telltale sign of a hidden vulnerability.
So you're essentially poking the software with weird stuff until it breaks?
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah. Tools like AFL, which stands for American Fuzzy Lop, and libfuzzer automate this process, making it much faster and more efficient than trying to do it manually. Fuzz testing is particularly good at identifying certain kinds of vulnerabilities, like a buffer overflow. That's where a program receives more data than it has allocated space for in a specific memory buffer, often causing it to crash or behave unpredictably, potentially opening the door for an attacker.
Okay, fuzzing finds flaws by running the program. Are there ways to find them just by looking at the code itself?
Absolutely. Another important method involves static analysis tools. Unlike fuzzing, which involves executing the program, these tools analyze the source code, or the compiled binaries, without actually running the program. They scrutinize the code itself, looking for patterns or structures that indicate potential vulnerabilities. It's almost like a super smart spell checker, specifically designed for security flaws in the code's logic or structure. Then there's symbolic execution, which is an even more advanced technique. It cleverly combines aspects of both static analysis, looking at the code, and dynamic analysis, running the code, sometimes in a simulated way, to explore different program paths and pinpoint those really tricky, hard-to-find weaknesses that might only occur under very specific conditions.
Wow, that sounds complex. Does regular software like antivirus play any role here?
It can, actually. Even your everyday antivirus software can contribute, particularly those with sophisticated heuristic analysis capabilities. These advanced antivirus programs don't just look for known malware signatures. They actively observe software behavior in real time. If they find an application behaving suspiciously, like, for instance, attempting to overwrite a critical system file without permission, or trying to access sensitive memory locations it shouldn't, they can potentially discover undocumented malware or exploits, even if they've never seen that specific attack before. It's like having a watchful guard who knows what normal behavior looks like and flags anything that seems out of the ordinary.
That's quite a range of discovery methods. So once you find all these potential weaknesses, what's the immediate goal?
Well, ultimately, the goal of all this discovery work is, of course, to correct these vulnerabilities, to fix them. The initial methods for doing that can vary quite widely. Sometimes it's as straightforward as installing a patch or a software update released by the vendor. That's often the ideal scenario. Sometimes, though, the fix involves a change in network security policy, like blocking certain types of risky traffic at the firewall. Or it might just mean reconfiguring software to use more secure settings. And sometimes the fix is even more fundamental, like educating users to be wary of social engineering tactics like phishing emails. Because let's face it, users are often the weakest link in any security chain, right?
Absolutely. Human error is always a factor.
It is. So this whole discovery and initial remediation process then naturally leads us to a crucial question. Once you find all these vulnerabilities, maybe hundreds or thousands of them, how do you even begin to measure their severity in a consistent, standardized way? Because a weakness isn't just a weakness. Some are definitely far more dangerous than others.
That's a great point. You can't possibly fix everything at once, especially in a large organization. So you absolutely need a way to decide what's most urgent, what poses the biggest risk, When we talk about measuring vulnerability severity, there's one open framework that has truly become the de facto standard across the cybersecurity world. The Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS. Its core purpose, as I understand it, is to provide those crucial quantifiable severity ratings for security vulnerabilities. The scores range from 0 to 10, with 10 indicating most severe. What's important to understand, I think, is that these scores aren't just pulled out of thin air. They're calculated based on formulas that use various metrics, trying to approximate ease with which an exploit can be carried out and its potential impact. And there are three main metric groups that feed into this calculation: the base, the temporal, and the environmental scores. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And CVSS itself has quite a history. It's been constantly evolving, always being refined to try and meet the changing landscape of cyber threats. It actually began with research by the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, or NIAC, way back in 2003 and 2004. This research led to the launch of CVSS version 1, or CVSS v1, in February 2005. The initial goal was ambitious: provide an open and universally standard way to rate vulnerability severity. However, this first version wasn't formally peer-reviewed, and feedback from early adopters quickly highlighted what they called significant issues. It wasn't quite hitting the mark.
So they went back to the drawing board pretty quickly.
They did. This feedback was really crucial. It led to the rapid development of CVSS version 2, or CVSS v2, with its final specification launched in June 2007. Around that time, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, or FIRST, took over as its custodian, guiding its future development and ensuring it had broader community input. Further insights and feedback from the security community prompted work on CVSS version 3 starting in 2012, which culminated in CVSS v3.0 being released in June 2015. Then there was a minor update, CVSS v3.1, released on June 17, 2019. Its primary goal wasn't to add new metrics, but really just to clarify and improve upon CVSS v3.0, focusing heavily on usability based on real-world experience. This version also introduced something called the CVSS Extensions Framework. This was important because it allowed for adding extra industry-specific metrics for things like privacy impacts, safety concerns, or unique factors in the automotive and healthcare sectors. It aimed to make the standard more adaptable.
So it's becoming more flexible over time.
Exactly. And most recently, CVSS version 4.0, or CVSS v4.0, was released in November 2023. That is the current version of the standard. If we connect this to the bigger picture, CVSS's primary goal isn't just to spit out a number. It's really about providing a deterministic, meaning consistent and repeatable way to score the severity of a vulnerability across many different organizations and constituencies. It aims to serve as a crucial, consistent input into an organization's larger decision-making matrix for things like risk assessment, remediation planning, and mitigation strategies specific to their particular environment. It strives to offer a common language, a shared understanding for everyone involved in cybersecurity to discuss the severity of a given weakness. This fosters better communication and ultimately leads to more informed decisions.
A common language, that's the key, isn't it? Especially with so many different people involved, technical teams, management, maybe even legal or compliance folks. Okay, so let's break down the core of CVSS then. Those three fundamental metric groups, base, temporal, and environmental, that determine its score. What exactly do they represent, and how do they combine to give us that overall assessment of severity?
Absolutely. Understanding these three groups is really key to grasping how CVSS provides this holistic, yet still flexible view of a vulnerability's severity. First up, we have the base metrics. Think of these as describing qualities that are intrinsic to the vulnerability itself. They're the inherent characteristics of the weakness. These generally remain constant over time and across different environments. For example, how a vulnerability is exploited or its direct impact on data confidentiality, if successful, will largely be the same, whether that vulnerability is found in a small startup system or a massive corporation's network. These are the fundamental properties.
So the unchanging core characteristics of the flaw itself.
Pretty much. Next are the temporal metrics. Now, these characteristics evolve over the lifetime of a vulnerability. They change with time and events in the real world. As time passes, things like the availability of exploit code might change a SIM point. Maybe a simple proof-of-concept exploit gets published online, or worse, a fully functional weaponized one appears. Similarly, a vendor might release a temporary workaround or an official patch, so the temporal score can fluctuate up or down, reflecting the real-world exploitability and the current status of fixes.
Okay, so that adds the time dimension. What's the third group?
The third group is environmental metrics. These attributes are unique, they're specific to a particular organization's implementation or operational environment. These are calculated subjectively, usually by the affected organization itself, to fine-tune the score based on their unique context. Things like how critical the affected system is to their specific business operations, or maybe how many of their systems are actually vulnerable to this particular flaw. This is where an organization customizes the score to reflect its own risk tolerance and specific setup.
Got it. Base is inherent, temporal is time-sensitive, and environmental is organization-specific context.
Exactly. Now, let's maybe delve into some of the CVSS v2 base metrics, just to provide a solid foundational understanding. While the specific numerical weights and some definitions have evolved in later versions, the core concepts remain fundamental to how severity is assessed across all versions. These metrics define the inherent nature of the vulnerability, independent of time or any specific deployment.
Okay, let's break those down.
All right, the first one is access vector, AV. This describes how a vulnerability may be exploited, essentially how close an attacker needs to be physically or logically. Is it a local L attack? This means the attacker needs physical access to the system, like plugging in a USB drive, or they need a local user account already. Think about privilege escalation attacks, where someone already logged in tries to get higher access, or attacks requiring physical presence like some FireWire attacks. Or is it an adjacent network A attack? Here, the attacker needs access to the same local network segment, like the same Wi-Fi network or Bluetooth range. Things like ARP spoofing or certain Bluetooth attacks fall into this category. The most severe, generally, is network N. This means the vulnerability is remotely exploitable, typically over the internet, working at layer 3 or above of the OSI model. The attacker doesn't need local access or physical proximity. A remote buffer overflow in a web server is a classic example. Clearly, a network exploitable vulnerability is generally considered much more severe at baseline than one requiring the attacker to be physically present.
Okay, so how they get in. What's next?
Second is access complexity, AC. This metric measures how easy or difficult it is to actually exploit the discovered vulnerability, assuming the access vector is met. High H complexity means specialized conditions exist that make exploitation difficult. Maybe there's a very narrow timing window for a race condition to succeed, or it requires a sophisticated social engineering method that knowledgeable users would likely notice. Medium M implies there are some additional requirements for success. Perhaps the attack must originate from a limited set of IP addresses, or the target system needs an uncommon, non-default configuration. And low L complexity means there are no special conditions required. The system is widely available, the configuration is common, and the exploit works reliably. Naturally, the easier it is to exploit low complexity, the higher the base score contribution.
Difficulty level.
Got it. What else contributes to the base score?
Third, we have authentication, AU. This describes the number of times an attacker must authenticate to a target system after gaining initial network access in order to exploit the vulnerability. Multiple M means the attacker needs to authenticate 2 or more times, perhaps with different credentials or through different systems. Single S means the attacker must authenticate just once. And none N means no authentication is required at all beyond potentially gaining network access. This is usually the highest impact factor here, as it means anyone who can reach the vulnerable service can potentially attempt the exploit.
Okay, access vector, access complexity, authentication. That seems to cover how the attack happens. What about the consequences?
Exactly. The next part covers the impact metrics. These assess the effect of a successful exploit on the system's core security properties: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, often called the CIA triad. First is confidentiality. C. What's the impact on the secrecy of the data stored or processed by the system? Is there MIT-CN? In. Is there partial P disclosure, meaning some data is revealed but the scope is limited? Or is it complete C, meaning total information disclosure, perhaps all sensitive data is compromised, or there's a direct serious impact from restricted information being exposed? Second is integrity. Now, what's the impact on the accuracy and trustworthiness of the exploited system or its data? Can the attacker make no-to-end changes? Is partial P, modification of some data or system files, possible, where the scope is limited? Or is there a complete C, loss of integrity, where the attacker can modify any files or data on the system at will? And third is availability A. What's the impact on the target system being accessible and functional for legitimate users? Is there no N impact? Is there partial P impact, like reduced performance or temporary loss of some functionality? Or is there complete C, loss of availability, where the system is totally shut down, unresponsive, or otherwise unusable? This covers things like denial of service attacks that consume network bandwidth, processor cycles, or memory.
So it's really about evaluating how an attacker gets in, how hard that process is, and then what kind of damage to confidentiality, integrity, or availability they can do once they're successful.
That makes a lot of sense conceptually. Can you walk us through maybe a quick example to see how these different factors combine into an actual score?
Absolutely, let's do that. Let's revisit that common scenario we mentioned. A buffer overflow vulnerability affecting a widely used web server software. And let's say this vulnerability allows a remote attacker with no authentication to gain partial control of the system, including the ability to cause it to shut down completely.
Okay, sounds like a pretty serious one. It does. So based on the CVSS v2 metrics we just discussed, attack vector AV, it would be network N because it's remotely exploitable via the internet. Attack complexity, AC. Let's say it's low, L, meaning there are no special requirements or conditions for the attack to succeed. It's straightforward. Authentication, AU. We said none, N, as no login or prior authentication is required to trigger the exploit. Confidentiality impact, C. We said the attacker gains partial control, so let's rate this as partial P. They can read some files and data, but perhaps not everything on the system. Integrity impact, A. Similarly, let's say partial P, as the attacker can alter some files and data, but maybe with limited scope, not full system control. Availability impact, A. We specify they can cause a shutdown, so that's complete C, loss of availability. Now, when you plug these specific characteristics, N, L, N, P, P, C, into the CVSS v2 formulas, which involve calculating separate exploitability and impact subscores, and then combining them, this particular scenario mathematically leads to an overall base score of 9.0 on the 0 to 10 scale.
9.0, okay, that definitely sounds high.
It is. And the vector string for this, which concisely summarizes these choices, would be av.nac.lau.ncpipc. The score, 9 points, and this vector string are normally presented together. This allows anyone looking at it to quickly understand not just the severity number, but the underlying nature of the vulnerability and how that score was derived. It provides crucial context. Okay, so that's the base score, the inherent severity. But you mentioned temporal metrics changing things over time. How does that work? Right. Now let's move to those CVSS v2 temporal metrics. These are fascinating because they modify that initial base score over the vulnerability's lifetime, reflecting real-world changes that happen after the vulnerability is initially discovered and scored. There are three key temporal metrics in CVSS v2. Exploitability E. This describes the current state of exploitation techniques or readily available automated exploit code. Is the exploit just theoretical? Unproven. Has a basic proof-of-concept P exploit code been released, maybe by researchers? Is there functional F exploit code available, perhaps used by penetration testers, or maybe even circulating in the wild? Or is it high H, meaning the exploit is widespread, perhaps incorporated into automated attack tools like worms or botnets? There's also not defined in D. This factor tells us how actively and easily the vulnerability is being exploited right now, remediation level, RL. This tracks how the temporal score might decrease as mitigations and official fixes become available from the vendor or community. Values include official fix, O, meaning a vendor patches out. Temporary fix, T, maybe a hot fix or workaround that reduces risk but isn't permanent. Or workaround W, perhaps a configuration change that makes exploitation harder. If no fix is available yet, it's often marked as unavailable U. Again, there's also not defined ND. Report confidence, RC. This measures the level of confidence in the existence of the vulnerability itself and the credibility of the published technical details. Is it unconfirmed, UC, maybe just a rumor or a single unverified report? Is it uncorroborated, UR, multiple sources reporting it, but perhaps conflicting details or still some uncertainty? Or is it confirmed, C, the vendor or a trusted source has officially acknowledged the vulnerability, and not defined, ND.
So these factors adjust the score based on how real the threat is and whether there's a way to stop it yet.
Precisely. Let's continue our buffer overflow example, which had a base score of 9.0. Let's see how the temporal score might change its overall severity rating over time. Imagine initially, the vendor was first informed about the vulnerability through a proof-of-concept code posting online. At this point, the metrics might be exploitability, proof-of-concept P, remediation level, unavailable, report confidence, unconfirmed, UC. Plugging these into the formula might result in a slightly lower overall score, say 7.3. The threat is there, but it's not fully confirmed, and no fix exists. The full vector might look like AVNACLAU, NCPI, PACE, PRL, UROCC, but then let's say the vendor investigates and confirms the vulnerability. The report confidence changes from unconfirmed UC to confirmed C. Suddenly, the score might rise, perhaps to 8.1, because the confirmation adds significant credibility and urgency. The vector updates. EPRL, URCC.
Now, suppose the vendor quickly releases a temporary fix or a solid workaround while they develop a full patch. The remediation level, RL, changes from unavailable U to temporary fix, T. The score might then reduce back down, maybe to 7.3 again, as the immediate risk is lessened somewhat by the workaround. And finally, if the vendor releases an official permanent patch, the remediation level, RL, changes to official fix. The score might reduce further, perhaps to 7.0.
Wow, so the same vulnerability score can really bounce around depending on what's happening in the real world.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how the score isn't a static number. It's a living measurement that dynamically changes, reflecting the constantly shifting landscape surrounding a vulnerability. It acknowledges that even with an official fix available, not every system will be patched immediately, and a widely available automated exploit could still pose a significant threat.
Okay, that covers base and temporal. What about the environmental metrics? You said they added the organization's specific context.
Yes, the CVSS V2 environmental metrics are subjective and designed to be set by the organization actually affected by the vulnerability. These allow you to fine-tune the score based on your actual deployment context because, as we discussed, a vulnerability in one system might be absolutely critical to your business, while the same vulnerability in another company's less important system might be negligible. There are two main environmental metrics, plus modifiers. Collateral damage potential, CDP. This tries to measure the potential secondary loss or impact beyond the directly affected IT asset. This could include loss of life, physical asset damage, or significant financial impact on the broader organization due to the compromise. Values range from none N up to high H, with intermediate steps like low L, low medium LM, medium high MH, plus not defined. Target distribution, NDD. This measures the proportion of vulnerable systems in your specific environment. Does the vulnerability affect none of your systems, a low L percentage, medium M, or high H, meaning almost all your systems of that type are vulnerable? Also has not defined ND. If it affects more of your systems, the environmental risk is higher. And then there are impact subscore modifiers for confidentiality, CR, integrity, IR, and availability, AR. These allow an organization to assess the specific security requirements for C, I, and A relevant to their specific environment for the affected asset. Are these low L, medium M, or high H priorities for this particular system in your business? For example, if maintaining data confidentiality is absolute paramount for a specific system, like a customer database, you can apply a high modifier, CRH, to that aspect, which will increase the environmental score. There's also not defined ND.
So you're basically adjusting the impact based on how much you actually care about C, I, and A for that specific system.
Exactly. It lets you tailor the impact assessment. Let's run an environmental score calculation example. Let's take our vulnerable web server from before, base score 9.0. Now imagine this specific web server is used by a bank for its critical online banking services, and currently only a temporary fix is available from the vendor, so the temporal score might be around 7.3. The bank security team assesses the environmental factors. For collateral damage potential, CDP, they might set it to medium-high, MH, due to the immense potential reputational damage and financial impact if sensitive personal banking information is accessed or disrupted. Target distribution, TD, might be high H if, say, all the bank's primary customer-facing web servers are running this vulnerable software version. Confidentiality requirement, CR, would almost certainly be high H because customers absolutely expect their banking information to remain confidential. Integrity requirement, IR, would also likely be high H, as financial transaction data and personal information must not be alterable without authorization. However, maybe the availability requirement, AR, is considered low, L, for this specific calculation, perhaps because while unavailability would be a major inconvenience and potentially costly, the bank has robust backup systems or alternative channels, like phone banking or branches, meaning it might not be deemed absolutely catastrophic for the entire bank's survival in the short term. With these specific environmental factors applied, CDPMH, TDH, CRH, IRH, ARL, the resulting environmental score for the bank, calculated using the CVSS V2 formulas, could be, let's say, 8.2.
So it went up from the temporal score of 7.3 to 8.2 because of the bank's specific business context.
Precisely. And this score, 8.2, falling within the 7.0 to 10.0 range, often considered high or critical, now clearly constitutes a critical vulnerability in the specific context of the affected bank's business operations. This really highlights how crucial these subjective, organization-specific environmental factors are to truly understanding the risk to your organization, rather than just relying on a generic base or temporal score.
That's fascinating how the score can shift so much based on context. It really paints a richer picture of the risk. So what does all this mean for the practical application of CVSS day to day? It sounds like a powerful tool, but clearly it's evolved because it wasn't perfect from the start. You mentioned version changes. What were some of the significant shifts or criticisms along the way that led to versions 3 and 4?
That's a critical question, because understanding the evolution helps understand the strengths and weaknesses. Well, CVSS, especially CVSS v2 with its base, temporal, and environmental metrics, has been widely adopted by major organizations like the National Vulnerability Database, NVD, the former Open Source Vulnerability Database, OSVDB, and the CERT Coordination Center. It hasn't been without its criticisms, which directly drove subsequent evolutions. Criticism of CVSS v2 was quite notable early on. Several vendors and security organizations publicly expressed dissatisfaction. For instance, Risk-Based Security was involved in publishing a public letter outlining perceived shortcomings. A major recurring theme was a lack of granularity in metrics.
Meaning too many different vulnerabilities ended up with the same score.
Exactly. This often resulted in many distinctly different vulnerabilities getting lumped together with the same score, making it incredibly difficult for organizations to prioritize effectively when faced with dozens or hundreds of vulnerabilities, all rated, say, 7.5. Which one do you fix first? Critics also noted that accurately scoring sometimes required too much specific, precise knowledge of the exact impact of the vulnerability, which wasn't always available early on. Oracle, a major software vendor, even went so far as to introduce their own non-standard partial plus value for the confidentiality, integrity, and availability impact metrics. They felt the official gap between partial and complete in CVSS v2 was too large, and they needed more nuance to accurately reflect the risk of vulnerabilities in their own products.
So the community was basically saying, we need more detail, more options. How did CVS v3 address that?
Precisely. To address these concerns, CVSS v3 saw some significant changes, particularly in the base metrics. It added new metrics like user interaction, UI, which could be none or required, and privileges required, PR, none, low, or high. Previously, these concepts were sort of implicitly lumped into the access vector or access complexity metrics in v2, but now they were distinct and more granular. This explicitly clarified that attacks requiring less user interaction, for example, the user doesn't need to click a malicious link, or fewer privileges, the example no administrator access needed to exploit, are generally considered more severe. A crucial addition was the scope S metric. This was designed to clarify whether a vulnerability in one software component could be exploited and then used by an attacker to pivot and attack other parts of a system or network components beyond the security scope of the vulnerable one. This aimed to better capture the potential for lateral movement or broader system compromise. The confidentiality, integrity, and availability (CIE) impact metrics were updated from the v2 scale of non-partial complete to the simpler none, low, high. This was intended to offer more flexibility and easier interpretation in determining the level of impact. Access complexity, AC, was renamed attack complexity, AC, with a clearer focus specifically on the technical difficulty and repeatability of the exploit itself, things like whether it requires perfect timing, complex user interaction, or other specific circumstances beyond the attacker's control, excluding user interaction, which was now its own metric. And finally, the attack vector, AV, saw the formal inclusion of a new metric value, physical P, specifically acknowledging vulnerabilities that require the attacker to physically touch or manipulate the device.
That sounds like a definite move towards more granularity. What about the temporal and environmental metrics in v3?
Interestingly, the temporal metrics in CVSS v3 were essentially unchanged conceptually from CVSS v2, as they were generally seen as quite effective already. However, the environmental metrics of CVSS v2 were completely removed and replaced. Instead, CVSS v3 introduced what is essentially a modified base score, basically. The organization recalculates the base score metrics, like attack vector, complexity, privileges required, user interaction, scope, CIA, but adjusts them to reflect their specific environment. On top of that, new environmental score metrics were added specifically to capture the relative importance, low, medium, high, or not defined, of confidentiality, CR, integrity, IR, and availability, AR, to that specific organization for the affected asset. This aimed to make environmental scoring more flexible and directly tied to the base characteristics.
Okay, so v3 tried to address the v2 criticisms. Did it succeed, or did new issues pop up?
Well, progress was definitely made. But like any evolving standard, CVSS v3 also faced some criticism. The CERT Coordination Center, for instance, published analysis discussing its potential limitations for accurately scoring vulnerabilities in emerging technology systems, particularly the Internet of Things, IoT.
They suggested that the standard still wasn't perfectly suited for the unique characteristics and potential impacts of vulnerabilities in these interconnected, often resource-constrained devices. The conversation continued.
Which brings us to the latest version, CVSS 4.0. What were the key changes there? More refinement?
Yes, exactly. More refinement and added clarity based on even more years of real-world use and feedback. CVSS v4.0, released in November 2023, is the current version. Among its several clarifications and improvements, a couple of notable changes stand out. There's a new base metric called attack requirements, AT. This metric complements attack complexity, AC. While AC focuses on the difficulty the attacker faces, AT assesses prerequisite conditions at the target system that are needed for exploitation, but which the attacker cannot influence or control. Examples include needing to win a race condition or the target system needing to be in a very specific, possibly rare state for the exploit to work. Its values are simple: none or present P. Perhaps the biggest structural change is that the impact metrics are now split into two groups: vulnerable system confidentiality, integrity, availability, impact, VCVI, VA, and subsequent system confidentiality, integrity, availability, impact, SCSISA. This pair of metrics directly replaces the broader, sometimes ambiguous Scope S metric from CVSS v3. It offers much more granular detail on what exactly is impacted. Is it just the system directly attacked, VCVI, VA? Or can the attacker pivot and significantly impact the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of other subsequent systems on the network, SCSISA? This provides a much clearer picture of the potential blast radius. Perhaps the biggest structural change is that the impact metrics are now split into two groups. CVSS v4 also includes further detail and clarification on other supplemental metrics, which don't affect the score directly but provide context, regarding things like public exploit availability, automatable, proof of concept unreported, environment-specific threat modeling, threat intensity, provider urgency, and system recovery.
Splitting the impact, that sounds really useful for understanding the potential domino effect of a breach. Can we walk through a quick V4 example?
Let's do that. It really highlights the increased nuance. Imagine a SQL injection vulnerability in an online web shop's customer login page. Let's say the database user account that the web shop software uses only has read-only access to the database, and the injection vulnerability is in a part of the application only visible to already registered logged-in customers. Using CVSS 4.0 metrics, AV, attack vector, and network, as the vulnerability can be triggered over the web, AC, attack complexity, LLO, assuming standard SQL injections can often be exploited reliably via automated scripts if no specific countermeasures are in place, AT, attack requirements, and none, meaning the attack doesn't depend on specific, unpredictable system conditions like race conditions, PR, privileges required, LLO, because attackers need to be authenticated as a regular user, not an admin, to reach the vulnerable code, UI, user interaction, and none, as no other users need to be involved or tricked into taking action for the exploit to work, VC, vulnerable system confidentiality, H, high, because even with read-only access, the attacker can likely read all tables in the directly vulnerable web shop database, potentially exposing sensitive customer data, SA, vulnerable system integrity, and none, as the database user has no write access, so the attacker cannot modify data in the vulnerable systems database, VA, vulnerable system availability, LLO, perhaps attackers could execute very long-running queries via the injection, potentially making the database slow or temporarily unresponsive for other users, SC, subsequent system confidentiality, and none. Let's assume there's no evidence the attacker can leverage this to access confidential data on other connected systems, SI, subsequent system integrity, and none, similarly, no impact on the integrity of subsequent system, SA, subsequent system availability. LLO, however, we can reasonably expect that other connected systems involved in, say, order management or logistics would be affected if the primary web shop database becomes unresponsive. So there's a low availability impact on subsequent systems. This specific scenario results in the CVSS 4.0 ejector, av.ntnfbr, lay.mbc, hvi.mva, lsc, nsi.nsal. This vector string clearly shows how CVSS is continually refined to provide more nuanced and specific measurements of vulnerability severity. It really forces you to think about the impact not just on the immediate target, but potentially on connected systems as well.
That level of detail is impressive. It seems like a much more informative snapshot of the potential risk.
It aims to be.
And the consistent adoption of CVSS versions, despite the criticisms and ongoing evolution by entities like the National Vulnerability Database and the CERT Coordination Center, really underscores its continued central role as the primary method for quantifying vulnerability severity across the industry. It provides that essential common starting point.
Okay, so CVSS gives us a detailed way to score vulnerabilities, helping us understand their inherent severity and, with environmental context, their potential impact. It's like getting a precise medical diagnosis for a specific security flaw. But as you said, a diagnosis alone isn't a treatment plan. How do organizations structure their entire approach to managing these risks systematically, from identifying them in the first place all the way through to recovering from potential breaches if something slips through? That's where comprehensive frameworks like the one from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, come in, right? NIST plays a critical role, providing a sort of blueprint for organizations to identify, protect, detect, respond to, and recover from cybersecurity threats, acting as a vital guide for overall vulnerability management strategy.
That's absolutely right. The NIST cybersecurity framework isn't just a guide, it's really a strategic blueprint. Think of it as a design for a holistic security ecosystem. It provides a structured, phased approach to addressing vulnerabilities and managing cyber risk that goes far beyond just scoring individual flaws. It's fundamentally about building a robust, resilient security posture from the ground up. It ensures a consistent process for addressing vulnerabilities and mitigating the associated risk across the entire enterprise, not just in isolated pockets. It's about building organizational resilience.
So it connects all the dots. What are the main phases or functions within that NIST framework?
The NIST framework consists of 5 core functions. They're often visualized as forming a continuous cycle, representing a security lifecycle that organizations should constantly iterate through. 1. Identify. This is the foundational phase. It's like taking a thorough inventory and understanding your assets and risks. It focuses on developing that deep organizational understanding needed to manage cybersecurity risk. Effectively, risk to your systems, your critical assets, your valuable data, and your core capabilities. Crucial activities here include maintaining an up-to-date asset inventory, because you absolutely can't protect what you don't know you have. Understanding your specific business environment and its mission-critical functions, establishing clear governance structures for security, conducting thorough risk assessments to pinpoint likely threats and impacts, and defining a clear overarching risk management strategy. This phase sets your baseline understanding. 2. Protect. Okay, once you know what you have and what the risks are, this phase is where you implement the actual safeguards. Organizations develop and implement appropriate measures to ensure the reliable delivery of critical services. This involves key areas such as robust identity management and access control, ensuring only the right people access the right things, comprehensive security awareness and training for all personnel, strong data security measures like encryption and data handling policies, established information protection processes and procedures, and crucially for our topic today, diligent maintenance activities, which explicitly includes robust patch management for vulnerabilities. This phase is where you build and actively maintain your defenses. 3. Detect. This phase is all about vigilance. It's your early warning system. Organizations develop and implement appropriate activities to identify the occurrence of a cybersecurity event as quickly as possible before significant damage is done. This includes actively looking for anomalies and events that deviate from normal operating baselines, implementing security continuous monitoring, which we'll discuss more later, to spot suspicious activity in near real time, and establishing clear detection processes and technologies. Think of it as always having your eyes and ears open for anything unusual or potentially malicious. 4. Respond. When an event is detected, this phase kicks in, focusing on swift, decisive, and effective action. It's about developing and implementing appropriate activities to take action regarding a detected cybersecurity incident. Key elements here include detailed response planning, knowing exactly what steps to take before an incident happens, maintaining clear communications channels with internal and external stakeholders during an event, conducting thorough analysis of the incident to understand its scope, root cause, and impact, deploying effective mitigation strategies to contain the damage and eradicate the threat, and fostering a commitment to continuous improvements based on lessons learned from every single incident. 5. Recover. The final phase focuses on getting back to normal operations as quickly and safely as possible after an incident, and ideally emerging even stronger than before. It's about restoring any capabilities or services that were impaired due to a cybersecurity incident. This involves comprehensive recovery planning, often part of business continuity, ongoing improvements to recovery processes and security controls to minimize the impact of future incidents, and maintaining transparent communications with stakeholders throughout the recovery process. This five-function framework provides that essential structured approach, that shared language we talked about earlier. It ensures organizations follow a consistent, repeatable process in identifying, assessing, addressing vulnerabilities, and mitigating the associated risks across the board. It's really about moving from chaotic, reactive firefighting to proactive, systematic, risk-informed security management.
It sounds incredibly comprehensive. What are the main payoffs for an organization that actually commits to adopting this kind of NIST framework for their vulnerability management?
The benefits of adopting NIST for vulnerability management are really significant and quite far-reaching. Primarily, and most obviously, it leads to a demonstrably improved security posture. Organizations gain a comprehensive and systematic approach to cybersecurity, rather than relying on ad hoc or piecemeal efforts. It also generally results in streamlined processes. Because the framework provides such a clear roadmap for action across different security functions, it tends to reduce confusion, duplication of effort, and operational inefficiencies. A core principle baked into NIST is risk-based prioritization. This is fundamental. It means organizations are guided to focus their limited resources and efforts on the most critical threats first, by evaluating the risk connected to each vulnerability, considering both likelihood and impact, and then ordering their remediation activities based on the potential impact of exploitation on their specific business. And finally, adopting a common framework like NIST facilitates better communication and knowledge sharing between organizations, government agencies, and across different industry sectors. It enables them to learn from one another's experiences, share best practices, and collectively bolster their security defenses, ultimately creating a stronger, more resilient overall digital environment for everyone.
Okay, that high-level strategy and the benefits sound compelling, but let's get down to the price tags, maybe into the weeds a bit. If that's the overall strategic blueprint, what are the actual tangible building blocks? What are the key components that truly make up a successful NIST-based vulnerability management program on the ground? Because, as they say, strategy is one thing, but successful implementation is where the real challenge lies.
That's absolutely right. That's where the rubber meets the road. A NIST-based vulnerability management program isn't just theory. It relies on several crucial interlinked components for effective implementation day-to-day. First and foremost, and you really can't overstate its importance, is asset inventory and classification. This is absolutely crucial. It's the foundation for determining which assets truly need protection and for effectively prioritizing remediation efforts later on. It involves identifying all assets within an organization, and in today's complex IT environments, this means everything. Physical servers, virtual machines, cloud instances, containers, databases, network devices like routers and switches, IoT devices, applications, you name it. Think of it like creating and maintaining a meticulous living library catalog of all your digital resources. These assets are then classified, usually based on their value and importance to the business's core mission. And all this information, what the asset is, where it is, who owns it, how critical it is, must be meticulously documented. Key recommendations here include regularly updating this inventory because environments change constantly, employing automated discovery tools to help identify and categorize assets accurately, and ensuring this critical inventory information is securely stored and accessible only to authorized personnel.
Why is this step so fundamental?
Because a precise and up-to-date asset inventory enables effective management of security risks. It allows you to apply the right level of protection to the right assets and ensures that your limited security resources are allocated where they can have the greatest impact, protecting your most valuable assets first. You simply can't protect what you don't know you have or what you don't know the value of. Second, building on that inventory is continuous monitoring and scanning. This component is all about ongoing vigilance. It helps organizations identify potential cybersecurity incidents and security flaws in a timely manner, ideally before they cause major problems. This means conducting regular scans specifically looking for known vulnerabilities across all those inventoried assets. It also means ongoing monitoring of network traffic and system logs for any suspicious activity that might indicate an attack in progress or an emerging threat. It's really vital to emphasize the importance of authenticated scans here. These are scans where the scanning tool actually logs into the target systems using provided credentials. They provide much more precise and comprehensive results compared to unauthenticated scans, which just look from the outside, significantly minimizing the chance of overlooking vulnerabilities hidden deeper within the system. In fact, many formal IT vulnerability management standards often recommend specific frequencies, like monthly vulnerability scanning for critical systems and applications, sometimes even more often. This isn't a one-off check. It's about constant vigilance,
like having security cameras always rolling and reviewing the footage regularly. Third, we have risk assessment and prioritization. We touched on this earlier, but it's a core component of the NIST approach. This enables organizations to focus their finite resources, time, money, people, on the most critical vulnerabilities first, rather than trying to fix everything at once or just fixing the easiest things. This involves systematically evaluating the likelihood of a particular threat actually occurring against a specific asset, the potential impact on the organization's operations, finances, or reputation if that threat materializes, and considering the cost and effort required to mitigate that risk. Organizations should regularly perform these risk assessments, implement a structured risk management process to guide decisions, and importantly, actively integrate cyber threat intelligence into this process. Knowing which vulnerabilities are being actively exploited in the wild right now drastically helps prioritize.
And why does this prioritization matter so much in the NIST context?
Because this risk-based approach ensures that the most critical vulnerabilities, those with the highest potential business impact and the highest likelihood of exploitation, are addressed first. This strategy significantly reduces the overall cybersecurity risk exposure for the organization in the most efficient way possible. And fourth, closing the loop, is remediation and patch management. This is the active process of actually addressing the identified and prioritized risks. It's where you fix the problems. This primarily includes implementing permanent fixes, such as applying patches for software flaws provided by vendors, correcting misconfigurations in systems or applications, or sometimes even removing a vulnerable asset entirely from the network if it's too old, too risky, or no longer needed. It also involves applying compensating controls when a full, permanent fix isn't immediately possible or practical. Think of these as temporary measures to reduce risk, like putting up a temporary barricade if you can't fully repair a bridge right away. Examples include hardening configurations, implementing stricter access controls, or deploying network segmentation. Critically, all changes made during remediation must be carefully documented, and organizations need to continuously monitor for new threats or regressions. IT vulnerability management standards often highlight that vulnerabilities related to missing critical security patches, or those that put high or moderate risk data or mission-critical systems at risk, must be prioritized for the absolute shortest remediation timeframes. A robust, timely remediation process here drastically enhances an organization's security posture and reduces the window of opportunity for attackers.
Okay, those four components, inventory, monitoring, risk assessment prioritization, and remediation seem like the core engine of the program. How do organizations actually get started implementing these NIST guidelines in their day-to-day vulnerability management process? What are the practical first steps?
That's a great question. Moving from understanding the components to actually implementing them involves several key practical actions. The very first foundational step is establishing a vulnerability management policy. This document really sets the stage. It outlines the program's objectives, defines the core processes like scanning frequency, risk rating, remediation timelines, and clearly assigns roles and responsibilities within the organization. Crucially, this policy shouldn't be a static document collecting dust on a shelf. It needs to be regularly reviewed and updated at least annually or whenever significant changes occur. Updates should ensure it aligns with evolving threats, incorporates the latest cyber threat intelligence findings, realistically addresses any resource constraints the organization faces, and perhaps most importantly, demonstrates clear management commitment and buy-in. Using standardized policy templates can often streamline the process of creating this initial policy, avoiding the need to start entirely from scratch. Next, selecting appropriate vulnerability scanning tools is absolutely paramount for effective detection, that continuous monitoring piece we discussed.
The market is full of options, so organizations need to carefully consider their specific needs. What types of assets do they need to scan? Servers, cloud, web apps, IoT. What types of vulnerabilities are they most concerned about? What level of automation is required? Does the tool need to scale easily as the network grows? What level of vendor support is available? Popular, well-regarded tools in this space that you often hear about include Nessus from Tenable, Qualys, OpenVAS, which is open source, and Akunetics, often focused on web applications. Choosing the right tools empowers organizations to conduct regular, proactive scans that are both thorough and efficient, forming the backbone of their detection capability. Third, and increasingly critical in today's threat landscape, is actively incorporating cyber threat intelligence, CTI. This is absolutely vital for staying informed about emerging threats and attacker tactics. It involves systematically collecting, analyzing, and then applying intelligence about new threats, evolving attack techniques, known indicators of compromise, IOCs, and specifically which vulnerabilities are being actively exploited right now in the wild.
This proactive approach significantly enhances an organization's ability to detect, prevent, and respond effectively to cyber attacks. It helps them anticipate risks before they materialize, strengthen their overall security posture by focusing on the most relevant threats, and make much more informed decisions about where to allocate security resources. Recommended methods include establishing a dedicated threat intelligence program or function, even if it's small, and developing a clear, systematic process for intelligence collection, analysis, and dissemination to relevant teams.
That all sounds great in theory, but putting it into practice must come with challenges, right? What are some of the common hurdles organizations face when trying to implement a robust NIST-based vulnerability management program, and what are the best practices for overcoming them?
You're absolutely right. It's definitely not without its challenges. Let's talk about a few key ones and how to tackle them. Perhaps the most universal challenge is overcoming resource constraints. Almost every organization faces limitations, whether it's not enough time, not enough budget, not enough skilled personnel, or inadequate technology. Security is often seen as a cost center, unfortunately. Strategies here are crucial. First, rigorously prioritize efforts based on risk assessment. Focus on the biggest dangers first. Allocate resources efficiently, maybe using automation to handle repetitive tasks. Consider outsourcing certain functions, like routine scanning or Tier 1 analysis, if it's more cost-effective. Leverage automation wherever possible to multiply the effectiveness of your existing team. And foster internal and external collaboration, share information and tools where appropriate. Another huge factor is ensuring management commitment. This is absolutely essential for the success of any significant security program, especially one like vulnerability management that requires ongoing investment and can sometimes impact productivity, like during patching. Without clear backing from top-level management, the program will inevitably struggle for resources, visibility, and cooperation from other departments. Management commitment is demonstrated through tangible actions. Allocating sufficient budget and personnel, providing clear guidance and strategic direction, setting achievable goals for the program, and actively tracking progress and holding people accountable. It really signals to the entire organization that security is a core business priority, not just an IT problem. Finally, a constant challenge is maintaining compliance with evolving standards. Cybersecurity regulations, industry best practices, and even the NIST framework itself are constantly changing and being updated to keep pace with new threats and technologies. Organizations must have processes in place to regularly review and update their own internal policies, procedures, and technical practices to ensure they remain aligned with the latest external requirements. This involves conducting regular internal and external audits, implementing necessary changes promptly based on audit findings or new standards, and actively staying informed about upcoming changes in regulations or relevant frameworks. Continuous monitoring and regular policy updates are absolutely key to reducing the risk of noncompliance, penalties, and fines, and more importantly, maintaining a genuinely strong and adaptive security posture over time. As a quick, practical example of this working in the real world, consider a large healthcare organization. They were facing growing regulatory pressure, like HIPAA, and seeing an increase in sophisticated cyber threats targeting patient data. They recognized the need for a much more structured approach than they had previously, so they decided to implement a formal NIST-based vulnerability management program. They started by establishing a comprehensive vulnerability management policy rooted in the NIST cybersecurity framework guidelines. They then carefully selected and deployed appropriate vulnerability scanning tools across their extensive network of hospitals and clinics. Crucially, they committed to consistently incorporating external cyber threat intelligence into their risk assessment and prioritization process. The result: within the first 2 years of fully implementing this program, they documented a significant, measurable reduction in both the number of cybersecurity incidents they experienced and, most importantly, the severity of data breaches. This case study powerfully demonstrates how a structured, NIST-based approach, when properly implemented and supported, can fundamentally enhance an organization's security posture and ensure ongoing compliance, proving that these frameworks deliver tangible, positive results.
That's a great example. It shows it's not just theoretical, it really works. But that point about management commitment and resource constraints really brings us back to that core challenge we talked about earlier, the sheer scale. You mentioned global corporate networks, sometimes numbering hundreds of thousands of individual assets. You add to that the ever-increasing number of reported vulnerabilities. Remember, the NIST National Vulnerability Database adds over 2,000 new security vulnerabilities every month. The raw output of scanning products from even a medium-sized network can quickly become just overwhelming. We're talking potentially millions of individual vulnerability instances needing consideration for remediation in the largest networks. So what does this all mean for a security team on the ground? Faced with the near impossible task of remediating all these vulnerabilities, prioritization isn't just a good idea, it's a crucial, absolutely non-negotiable prerequisite for effective remediation. Organizations must prioritize, or they'll simply drown in alerts and achieve nothing meaningful.
You've perfectly captured the core dilemma, the central problem that plagues almost every security operations team. Now, a very basic method for prioritization, which is sometimes even mandated by certain industry standards, like the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, is to simply use those CVSS severity ratings, whether it's V2 or V3, as a direct proxy for risk. The idea seems straightforward on the surface. Just address all vulnerabilities scoring above certain thresholds, say anything rated 7.0 or higher, high and critical. While this seems logical and might be manageable for very small environments with few assets, this approach comes with some really critical limitations, especially when you try to apply it to large, complex enterprise networks.
What are the main problems with just using the CVSS score?
The biggest issue is the inherent lack of granularity and diversity in the CVSS scores themselves when applied at scale. By its very design, the CVSS system offers only 101 possible numerical scores, ranging from 0.0 to 10.0 in 0.1 increments. Now, if you do a quick investigation of real-world data from the NVD, you'll find that historically NIST has only actually attributed scores using about 73 of those 101 possibilities. Even worse, just 6 specific scores, like 7.5, 9.8, 5.0, etc., make up a staggering 67%, two-thirds, of all vulnerabilities cataloged in the NVD. When you look inside typical enterprise networks, the picture is similar or even more skewed. You usually see fewer than 60 different CVSS scores actually instantiated across all the vulnerabilities found. And typically, about 12 common scores account for a massive 90% of all the vulnerability instances detected by scanners.
So basically, everything clusters around a few common high scores.
Exactly. What this tells us is that simply using the baseline, only published CVSS scores without adding any other contextual information as a measure of risk can lead to a substantial waste of time and resources. Why? Because far too many different vulnerabilities end up with the same high score, like critical 9.8. You can't effectively decide which of 1,000 vulnerabilities all rated 9.8 you should fix first if that's the only information you have. It just doesn't differentiate enough. And even when you try to incorporate the temporal and environmental components of CVSS, which, as we discussed, are designed to add more context, and could theoretically increase the potential number of paths to a final calculated score into the few thousands. The system still maps all of that complex analysis back down to scores on the same limited 0.0 to 10.0 scale. So while it adds nuance, it often doesn't solve the fundamental granularity problem needed to truly prioritize effectively in environments with even just a few thousand assets, let alone hundreds of thousands or millions. Furthermore, relying heavily on manual calculation of temporal and environmental scores across an entire enterprise is often described in the sources we reviewed as being potentially error-prone and something that hardly scales with modern network complexity. There's also acknowledgement of great variability in judgment, even among seasoned security experts, when trying to apply these subjective metrics consistently at scale. It's a complex, manual process that simply struggles to keep up with the overwhelming volume and speed of new threats and vulnerability disclosures.
Okay, that really paints a clear picture of the limitations. If CVSS, even with its temporal and environmental components, isn't the whole answer for effective prioritization at scale, what other risk frameworks or methods can help organizations truly identify what matters most in that overwhelming sea of alerts? Because clearly something more nuanced, maybe more automated, is desperately needed.
That's precisely where more mature organizations, or those dealing with massive scale, have started to look. They understand they need to move beyond using CVSS as the sole proxy for risk, and instead utilize more elaborate, holistic risk management frameworks. These can include established frameworks like the NIST Risk Management Framework, RMF, distinct from the cybersecurity framework, various ISO standards related to risk management, like ISO 27005, the FAIR framework, which stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk and focuses on quantifiable risk, Risk IT, from ISCM, or others like JHR. These frameworks provide a more nuanced and flexible approach to evaluating risk, recognizing that security isn't just a technical problem, but deeply intertwined with business context. At the heart of almost all these broader risk management frameworks is the fundamental definition of risk, often expressed simply as risk equals likelihood multiplied by impact, or the formula R equals LXI.
Likelihood times impact. Okay, that sounds simple enough.
Conceptually simple, yes, but implementing it accurately at scale is the challenge. Likelihood represents the probability that a specific incident actually occurs specifically. For our discussion, the probability that a given vulnerability is successfully found and exploited by malicious adversaries targeting your organization. Research has actually made significant strides in refining this L component in recent years. This includes evaluating exploitation potential based on factors like the presence of public exploit code, mentions in dark web forums, or whether it's included in known exploit kits. It involves building sophisticated machine learning models trained on vast amounts of historical vulnerability intelligence to predict which vulnerabilities are most likely to be exploited next. And it involves optimizing discovery to remediation models based on real-world attacker behavior. There's a lot of data science and threat intelligence going into estimating L more accurately now. However, impact I is where it gets incredibly challenging, especially trying to automate it. This represents the actual impact or consequence to the organization if that incident, the vulnerability exploitation, occurs. And frankly, as the sources note, very little research has been successfully published on reliably automating the estimation of the impact at scale, especially in a way that accurately relates to the specific business context and value of assets within the organization itself.
Why is estimating that impact part so hard to automate?
Well, think about it. Measuring impact accurately and comprehensively is theoretically a task requiring near-perfect knowledge of the entire operational context of the affected asset and the business processes it supports. Why? Because you would ideally need to consider potentially infinitely many factors to get a truly precise measure, things like the specific business processes affected, potential regulatory fines, loss of customer trust, reputational damage, intellectual property loss, downstream effects on partners. The list goes on and on. It's incredibly complex and specific to each organization. Most frameworks, therefore, realistically aim for an approximate measure of impact. One direct, though manual method, involves maintaining specific business-related value scoring for each critical asset. This scoring could be quantitative, like assigning a precise dollar amount representing potential loss, or more commonly qualitative, using categories like low, medium, high, or critical impact. This asset valuation is actually assumed as a prerequisite by frameworks like FAIR, Risk IT, or guidance like NIST SP 830 on risk assessment.
But you said that comes with scalability issues.
Exactly. For networks with thousands, let alone hundreds of thousands of assets, it's just not realistic or feasible to manually assign and, more importantly, continuously update meaningful business impact values for every single asset. The environment changes too fast. Even relying on human-driven estimation where experienced security practitioners or asset owners try to distill that organizational tribal knowledge to assign impact scores is described as being extremely strenuous and labor-intensive. It hardly scales with modern network complexity and is notoriously prone to inconsistency over time due to subjective factors like individual analyst fatigue, differing opinions, maybe even internal corporate politics influencing how assets get valued or risks get perceived. So if both traditional CVSS scoring and manual impact assessment have these significant limitations at scale, modern organizations really need something different, something more automated, data-driven, and adaptive.
Okay, so if traditional CVSS is too coarse-grained for large environments and manually automating impact assessment at scale is just incredibly difficult, what are modern organizations actually doing to truly prioritize effectively? How are they going beyond these limitations and dealing with the sheer scale of the problem in practice? Is there a breakthrough in how they're approaching this prioritization challenge?
This is where some really interesting modern data-driven approaches are starting to emerge and gain traction, specifically leveraging machine learning and big data analytics. One key concept here is often referred to as contextual prioritization. This isn't a single standard, but rather a modern risk-based data aggregation model or approach. Its core idea is to bring together both elements of the risk equation, the estimated likelihood L of a vulnerability being exploited, and its estimated business impact for the organization, but critically, doing so in a way that is far more scalable, automated, and flexible than traditional manual methods allow.
How does that actually work? How can it estimate impact without that perfect knowledge you mentioned?
It works by continuously extracting and learning from a huge number of diverse data points, essentially acting like a collective intelligence system. It pulls in signals from expert security analysts' activities within the organization, like which alerts they investigate, which systems they patch first, in a non-intrusive way. It combines this with vast amounts of open-source intelligence, OSINT, things like vulnerability databases, exploit databases, security news feeds, dark web chatter, and it integrates feeds from private threat intelligence providers. This concept of passive signal extraction helps the system learn and implicitly transfer the organization's priorities and the real-world threat landscape context into machine learning models, without requiring explicit manual input for every asset. This can also be supplemented with unsupervised machine learning techniques. These techniques can statistically analyze network traffic patterns, asset configurations, and communication flows to automatically group similar assets and characterize the typical behavior and potential importance of assets on different subnets.
This essentially tries to simulate an experienced attacker's intuition and behavior when identifying high-value targets within a defined network environment. And importantly, this model is designed to be flexible enough to be complemented with simpler heuristics or any pre-existing risk categorization the organization might already have in place, like tagging critical servers.
What are the main advantages of this kind of contextual, data-driven approach?
The benefits are potentially substantial, especially for larger organizations. First, it's much more scalable than traditional methods. It can be applied continuously across the entire network, potentially evaluating millions of vulnerability instances, not just a manually assessed subset of critical assets. Second, it works effectively even with incomplete knowledge. The machine learning models are designed to infer relationships and estimate risk even when some data points are missing, which is always the case in complex environments. Third, it naturally improves over time as the underlying data set grows and the models learn from new threat intelligence and internal activity. It's adaptive. And finally, it evaluates risk in a potentially more fault-tolerant way. By incorporating diverse data points from many different sources, internal, external, automated, human, it leverages the wisdom of the crowd principle, reducing the risk of making poor prioritization decisions based on a single flawed data point or biased human judgment.
That sounds much more suited to the scale and speed of modern cybersecurity. Are there other, maybe simpler prioritization methods people are using in the real world, perhaps combining CVSS with other factors?
Absolutely. Beyond these advanced, often vendor-driven contextual models, you definitely see practitioners sharing their own pragmatic prioritization methods online, often drawing directly on their real-world operational experience and trying to find practical solutions. For example, one user on a Reddit security forum proposed a specific, quite clever mathematical approach for prioritization that beautifully illustrates this point of needing more context than just CVSS. Their suggested formula was priority square root of CVSS2 plus num2 plus EAS2.
Okay, interesting. Like a 3D distance calculation. What do those variables mean?
Exactly. It's like calculating the distance from the origin in 3D space. CVSS is the traditional score, maybe normalized, forming an x-axis. Num represents the number or percentage of devices within their specific environment reporting the vulnerable software. This acts as a y-axis, measuring prevalence or exposure. They used a 0-10 scale based on percentage bands. For example, 1 equals 0, 10%, 9 equals 80, 90%, 10, 100%. And ease signifies the perceived ease of exploit, for instance, if it's mostly automated or requires complex manual steps. They used a simple 1 to 5 scale, where e.g. 5 equals fully automated, like via Windows Update, serving as a z-axis. The core idea, as you guessed, is that the further from the origin your calculation lands, meaning the higher the combined value of these factors, severity, prevalence, ease, the higher the priority should be for remediation. Let's look at the specific examples they gave to see this in action and pay close attention to the insights revealed. First, CVE 2022-0540, which was a vulnerability in Jira software. Its official CVSS v3.1 score was a very high 9.9, critical.
But in their environment, the num value was only 1, meaning it only affected 0-10% of their devices, and they rated the ease as 4, mostly automated. Plugging these into the formula gives a calculated priority score of approximately 10.72. Now consider CVE 2022-0462, a vulnerability in the Chromium browser engine, used by Chrome, Edge, etc. Its official CVSS v3.1 score was a notably lower 6.5 medium, but in their environment, num was 9, meaning it affected a huge 80-90% of their devices, and ease was 5, fully automated exploit delivery, perhaps via standard browser updates or malicious websites. The calculated priority here jumps up to 12.10. Finally, CVE 2022-21987, a vulnerability in Microsoft SharePoint. Its CVSS v3.1 was a high 8.0. Let's say num was 2, affecting maybe 10-20% of their relevant servers, and ease was 5, perhaps easily exploitable via standard update mechanisms if unpatched. This calculation gives a priority of 9.64.
Wow, what stands out immediately there is that clear demonstration you mentioned earlier. That vulnerability with a much lower raw CVSS score, the Chromium one at 6.5, actually ends up with a significantly significantly higher calculated priority at 12.17 than the supposedly critical 9.90 vulnerability at 10.72 in their specific context. And that higher priority happens simply because the lower CVSS vulnerability affects a vast majority of devices across their enterprise and is incredibly easy to exploit. This really drives home the point, doesn't it? Raw CVSS alone clearly isn't the full picture for practical prioritization. Contexts like broad exposure and ease of exploitation are equally, if not sometimes more, important in the real world.
Exactly. It's a perfect illustration. And you hear similar sentiments echoed by other practitioners. Many emphasize putting asset criticality first. The consensus from numerous security veterans is that you should almost always prioritize your most exposed servers, like those sitting in your network's demilitarized zone, DMZ, and other identified mission-critical assets above almost anything else. Some even argue that for these crown jewel assets, you should aim to remediate all vulnerabilities, even those rated as low severity by CVSS. Why? Because, as one commenter bluntly put it, a hacker has no pride and will be glad to hack you with a low just as much as with a high, especially if that low severity vulnerability gives them a crucial foothold onto a critical system. This really means focusing your limited remediation efforts where a potential breach would cause the most business impact, regardless of the individual vulnerability severity score in isolation. It's about protecting what matters most to the business.
So vendors are picking up on this need for more context too.
Yes, definitely. Vendors like Tenable, for example, offer their own proprietary VPR, Vulnerability Priority Rating Score. This score explicitly tries to incorporate additional factors beyond just the base CVSS metrics, using threat intelligence and data science to predict the likelihood of exploitation. This VPR score is often designed to be paired with an organization's own internal asset criticality score or tagging system to give a much more tailored and actionable prioritization ranking than just relying on CVSS alone. Another common practical approach you see discussed for multi-parameter evaluation involves security teams assessing each significant vulnerability instant based on maybe 5 different parameters: the assigned asset value, or criticality, the information sensitivity of the data residing on that asset, the calculated CVSS score, often including temporal and environmental adjustments, the asset's exposure, for example, is it internet-facing or purely internal, and its current exploitability based on threat intelligence. This holistic view attempts to capture the true contextualized risk far better than just a single technical score can.
Okay, so once an organization has gone through all that effort, discovery, scoring, and finally sophisticated prioritization using context, what are their actual options for dealing with those top priority vulnerabilities? Is it always about patching?
That's the next crucial step in the cycle taking action. Once vulnerabilities are effectively prioritized, organizations generally have 3 main options for addressing them. Remediation. This is usually the ideal outcome, the gold standard. Remediation means completely resolving a vulnerability so that it can no longer be exploited by attackers. This typically includes activities like applying vendor-supplied patches to fix software flaws, correcting misconfigurations in systems or applications, updating vulnerable software libraries, or sometimes even decommissioning and removing a vulnerable asset entirely from the network if it's too old to patch, too inherently risky, or simply no longer serves a necessary business function. However, full remediation isn't always immediately possible or practical. Think about zero-day vulnerabilities where no patch exists yet, or situations where patching might break critical legacy applications or be considered too resource-intensive for the immediate threat level perceived. Mitigation. When full remediation isn't feasible in the short term, or perhaps is deemed too costly or disruptive compared to the risk, mitigation comes into play. This involves implementing specific security controls designed to make exploitation of the vulnerability more difficult for an attacker, or to lessen the potential impact if exploitation does occur. It's about reducing the risk, even if you can't eliminate the underlying vulnerability itself right away. Examples of mitigation include things like configuration hardening, example, enabling stricter security settings, disabling unnecessary services, implementing stricter authentication requirements, enforcing the principle of least privilege access so compromised accounts have less power, using network segmentation to isolate vulnerable systems, or creating specific incident response playbooks tailored to detect and react quickly if that particular vulnerability is exploited. Acceptance. Finally, there's the option of acceptance. This is typically reserved for vulnerabilities that, after careful analysis, are deemed highly unlikely to be exploited in the organization's specific environment, or those where the potential impact if they were exploited would be minimal, and the cost or effort required for remediation or mitigation would be disproportionately high and judged cost ineffective. In these cases, the organization makes a conscious, documented decision to formally accept the associated risk.
This decision isn't taken lightly. It typically requires a thorough risk assessment, clear documentation of the rationale, and formal approval from appropriate levels of management. It's acknowledging the risk exists, but deciding it's tolerable for the business under current circumstances.
Remediation, mitigation, acceptance. Got it. That whole process, discovery, analysis, prioritization, action, sounds like a huge amount of ongoing effort. But the digital world, as we keep saying, isn't static, is it? Vulnerabilities are discovered daily, new threats emerge constantly, and our own digital environments are always changing, with new software, new cloud services, new user behaviors. So how do organizations ensure their security measures aren't just a one-time fix based on yesterday's snapshot, but become a living, adapting shield that can truly keep pace with this relentless change? That sounds like where this idea of information security continuous monitoring, or ISCM, becomes absolutely vital.
Precisely. You've hit on the core need for the next stage. Information Security Continuous Monitoring, ISCM, is formally defined by NIST as maintaining ongoing awareness of information security, vulnerabilities, and threats to support organizational risk management decisions. Unquote. Now, it's really critical to understand that the terms continuous and ongoing in this specific context don't necessarily mean real-time monitoring of every single thing every single second. That's often impractical or impossible. Instead, it means that security controls are assessed and organizational risks are analyzed at a frequency that is sufficient to support timely, risk-based security decisions and adequately protect the organization's valuable information assets given their specific threat landscape and risk tolerance. It's about maintaining situational awareness across all critical systems and processes within the organization at all times at the right frequency. The overarching purpose of ISCM is really profound. It's intended to enable a fundamental shift in how organizations approach security. The goal is to move away from periodic, compliance-driven risk management, where maybe you only do thorough checks once a year just to pass an audit, towards truly data-driven, ongoing risk management. ISCM aims to provide organizations with the near, real-time, often demand-driven information they need to support dynamic risk response decisions. It helps them accurately understand their current security posture at any given time and gain ongoing insight into the actual effectiveness or ineffectiveness of their deployed security controls. Ultimately, this dramatically increases organizational resilience, the ability to anticipate, withstand, adapt to, and recover from adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromises on systems that use cyber resources.
So it's about constantly taking the pulse of your security health.
That's a great analogy. And zooming out again to connect it to the broader picture, ISCM is defined as a critical step within an organization's overall risk management framework, or RMF, like the one defined in NIST SP 837. It plays a crucial role in ensuring that the security controls deployed during the protect phase remain effective over time, and that the organization's actual operational risk stays within the predefined stated organizational risk tolerances. Especially in light of the inevitable changes, new technologies, new threats, configuration drift that occur constantly over time. It transforms what could be a static security posture into a dynamic, adaptive one that learns and adjusts.
This idea of ongoing awareness sounds absolutely foundational, almost like it should be the central nervous system of an organization's entire security posture. How is this actually structured within a large organization? Does the responsibility flow just from the top down, or is it more of a bottom-up effort, or maybe both, feeding into each other?
It's definitely both, and that interconnectedness is a crucial insight into how effective ISCM works. ISCM is typically structured using a three-tiered approach. This model emphasizes that continuous monitoring involves and provides value to the entire organization, from the most senior leaders making high-level strategic decisions down to the individual system administrators and operators dealing with daily incidents and alerts. It's often visualized as a pyramid, with high-level governance at the top and detailed system operations forming the base, all interconnected by flows of information and policy. Tier 1 organization. This is the strategic apex of the pyramid. Activities at this tier address high-level information security governance policy. The focus is on understanding and managing risks to the organization as a whole, considering its core missions, overarching business functions, and overall risk appetite. Tier 1 is where the overarching ISCM criteria are broadly defined, including how risk is assessed, how responses are prioritized across the enterprise, how monitoring results are aggregated and reported upwards, and what level of executive oversight is required. The metrics reported at this tier typically support strategic governance decisions, often providing an aggregated dashboard-style view of risk posture across the entire enterprise for senior leadership and the board. Tier 2 Mission Business Processes. This tier sits in the middle, bridging strategy and operations. It focuses on overseeing risk management activities specifically for one or more critical missions or core business processes. Think about things like online banking operations, patient electronic health record systems, or supply chain management logistics. The ISCM criteria and monitoring frequencies defined here are driven by how these specific business processes are prioritized by the organization, their unique information security needs, and how they align with the organization-wide security program strategy defined at Tier 1. Controls in the Program Management PM family within NIST frameworks, for example, which address the establishment and ongoing management of the organization's information security program itself, are often tracked and reported at this tier, Tier 3 information systems. This is the operational base of the pyramid, where the vast majority of the detailed monitoring and data collection actually occurs. Tier 3 addresses risk management from the perspective of individual information systems, applications, and network components. Activities here focus on ensuring that all system-level security controls, whether they're technical controls like firewalls and intrusion detection systems, operational controls like backup procedures, or management controls like access reviews, are correctly implemented, are operating as intended, and critically remain effective over time against current threats. This tier also includes assessing and monitoring any common or hybrid controls shared across multiple systems, that are implemented at the system level. Security status reporting originating from Tier 3 often includes very granular details, such as specific security alerts from monitoring tools, logs of detected incidents, results from vulnerability scans, and identified threat activities occurring on individual machines or network segments.
So information flows both ways in this pyramid.
Absolutely. The key to this tiered approach is the data flow and the relationship between the tiers. Data that is primarily collected down at Tier 3, the system level, is aggregated, correlated, and summarized as it flows upward. This provides tailored security status reports or calculated risk scores suitable for a single system owner, or for a collection of systems supporting a business process, Tier 2, or ultimately providing an abstracted view for the entire organization, Tier 1. Conversely, policies, procedures, standards, and tools established at the higher tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2, flow downward to facilitate the consistent implementation of ISCM across the entire organization. This top-down guidance helps ensure better data reuse, more efficient resource utilization, and standardized reporting formats at the lower tiers. Crucially, this bidirectional flow means that observations and findings identified at the lower tiers can directly inform and lead to strategic changes in the upper tier strategies or policies, creating a true dynamic feedback loop across the whole organization.
That structure makes a lot of sense, different levels of detail for different audiences, but all connected. So what's the actual workflow then? How do organizations establish and maintain this ISCM capability? It sounds like it has to be a constant, never-ending feedback loop in practice to be effective.
It absolutely is a continuous feedback loop, or perhaps better described as a perpetual cycle. NIST typically outlines the ISCM process in 6 distinct iterative steps. It's truly about embedding constant vigilance and adaptation into the organization's culture and operations. 1. Define ISCM strategy. This is the crucial foundational step, setting the direction. The ISCM strategy must be firmly rooted in the organization's specific, documented risk tolerance. How much risk is leadership willing to accept in pursuit of its mission? The strategy needs to clearly articulate the goals, such as maintaining clear visibility into organizational assets, maintaining awareness of current vulnerabilities, keeping up to date with relevant threat information, and having a solid understanding of potential mission or business impacts from security failures. This strategy also explicitly aims to ensure the continued effectiveness of deployed security controls over time and verify ongoing compliance with internal policies and external information security requirements. It's essentially the high-level blueprint for the entire program, defining what success looks like and the core principles for achieving it. 2. Establish ISCM program. This is where the high-level strategy becomes actionable, where you design the specific mechanics of your monitoring program. This step involves determining the specific metrics you'll need to collect what concrete data points are most important for measuring security posture and risk. It also involves setting the appropriate monitoring frequencies for assessing security status. How often do we need to check different things? It includes defining assessment frequencies for formally auditing the effectiveness of specific security controls. How often do we need to verify that a control is still working correctly? And crucially, it involves designing the overall ISCM technical architecture, what tools, sensors, databases, and systems will be used to collect, store, analyze, and report all this monitoring data.
That point about frequencies seems really important. How do organizations decide how often is often enough? It can't be the same for everything, right?
Exactly. That's a critical aspect, and these frequencies are definitely not static or uniform across all metrics or all systems. Organizations need to consider several criteria when establishing these frequencies, and this is where it gets very nuanced and risk-based. First is security control volatility. Controls that change frequently or are prone to misconfiguration, like firewall rules, configuration settings CM6, or the list of installed software, information system component inventory CM8, require much more frequent assessment, often using automated tools daily or even hourly. Less volatile controls, like the assignment of roles and responsibilities, position categorization PS2, might only need formal assessment annually. Second, system categorizations or impact levels. High-impact systems, those absolutely critical to the organization's mission or handling highly sensitive data, are naturally monitored far more frequently and rigorously than moderate or low-impact systems, typically in accordance with standards like FIPS 199 in the U.S. federal government context. Third, security controls or specific assessment objects providing critical security functions. Key infrastructure components like central authentication servers, log management servers, or perimeter firewalls are prime candidates for more frequent, intensive monitoring because their failure could have widespread, cascading negative effects. Fourth, security controls with already identified weaknesses. If a previous security assessment report, SESAR, or an existing plan of action and milestones, POA&M, has flagged a specific risk or weakness associated with a control, that weakness automatically triggers more frequent monitoring and assessment until it's fully remediated and verified. Fifth is the organizational risk tolerance. Organizations with a naturally lower tolerance for risk will, understandably, choose to monitor more frequently and comprehensively. This is often the case for organizations handling large amounts of sensitive personally identifiable information, PII, critical financial data, or those facing persistent, sophisticated cyber threats. Sixth, active threat information. If current, credible threat intelligence indicates that specific types of systems or vulnerabilities are being actively targeted by adversaries, e.g., a new exploit kit targeting a specific browser plugin, this can trigger temporary or even permanent increases in monitoring frequencies for related controls or assets. Seventh, current vulnerability information. The release schedule for patches from major software vendors, actually Microsoft's Patch Tuesday, directly influences vulnerability scan frequencies. You'd typically want to scan shortly after patches are released to identify systems that haven't been updated yet. The discovery of critical zero-day vulnerabilities would also trigger immediate targeted scanning. Eighth, risk assessment results. Findings from both formal periodic risk assessments and informal ongoing risk analysis directly inform and influence decisions about monitoring frequencies for specific systems or controls. Ninth, external reporting requirements. Sometimes external mandates, like government agency requirements for quarterly FISMA reports, can dictate minimum monitoring and reporting frequencies, regardless of the organization's internal risk assessment. Ninth, external reporting requirements. And 10th, achieving granular monitoring is key. Even within a single complex security control, like NIST's AZ2 account management control, which has 10 distinct requirements covering things like account creation, modification, disabling, termination, etc., different elements may warrant very different monitoring frequencies. For example, you might need near real-time monitoring to ensure temporary user accounts are automatically disabled upon expiration, but perhaps only monthly or quarterly reviews are needed to formally revalidate the categorization of all account types. It's also really important to consider event-driven assessments. Beyond the regularly scheduled monitoring, specific significant events, such as adding a brand new critical web application, migrating a major system to a new cloud provider, detecting a major security incident, or the emergence of a widespread critical new threat like Log4j, and should trigger immediate unplanned assessments outside of the normal schedule. This flexibility to react to events is absolutely vital in today's dynamic threat landscape. And finally, establishing the program involves developing an ISCM architecture. This defines how all the security information will be collected, aggregated, correlated, analyzed, and delivered effectively within and between the different tiers of the organization, and potentially shared externally with partners or oversight bodies. Core requirements for this architecture include robust data collection capabilities, sensors, agents, log shippers, secure and scalable data storage, powerful analysis engines like SIEMs, and flexible retrieval and presentation tools like dashboards and reporting systems. Using standardized methodologies and data formats like SCP wherever possible maximizes efficiencies and promotes better information exchange between different tools and teams. This architecture is essentially the plumbing and wiring that makes the whole ISCM system function. 3. Implement ISCM program. This is the execution phase, where the plans are put into action. Security-related information,
The raw data, like logs, scan results, alerts, is collected for all the predefined metrics according to the established frequencies. Formal security control assessments are conducted periodically as scheduled. And findings from both monitoring and assessment activities are reported according to the policies and procedures defined earlier. It's crucial during implementation that all classes of security controls, management controls, like policies and procedures, operational controls, like awareness training and incident response, and technical controls, like firewalls and encryption, and all types of controls, common controls inherited from the enterprise, hybrid controls, partly common, partly system-specific, and system-specific controls, are included within the scope of the ISCM program. You need visibility across everything. And again, automation should be leveraged wherever technically feasible and cost-effective for data collection, initial analysis, and routine reporting, as manual processes simply can't keep up with the volume and velocity of data in modern environments. 4. Analyze data and report findings. Okay, so you're collecting all this data. Now what? This step focuses on developing clear procedures for conducting deep analysis of the collected monitoring and assessment data, and then communicating the findings clearly and effectively through reports. This includes defining precisely who receives which reports, what the content of those reports should be tailored to the audience, the format they should take, e.g. dashboard, detailed spreadsheet, executive summary, and the required frequency of reporting. The analysis itself involves much more than just looking at raw data. The information needs to be interpreted within the context of the organization's stated risk tolerances. Analysts need to consider the potential impact of identified vulnerabilities or control failures on specific systems, on the business processes they support, and potentially on the organization as a whole. They also need to evaluate the potential impact and effectiveness of various mitigation options. And critically, evolving vulnerability and threat data from external sources is always considered during this analysis phase to add crucial context. Is this finding related to something being actively exploited right now? Reporting then needs to be carefully tailored to the recipient. For example, a senior risk executive might receive a high-level, maybe quarterly or annual, report summarizing the overall risk posture and trends, while a network administrator or security analyst likely needs minute-by-minute updates on a real-time dashboard showing immediate threats and alerts requiring action. Organizations must also define clear reporting requirements and processes, even for controls that are monitored manually, like reviewing policy documents. 5. Respond to findings. Based on the result of that detailed analysis, this is where the organization takes action. They implement appropriate technical, management, and operational mitigating activities to address the identified risks. Or, based on the analysis, they might make a formal decision to accept the risk if low enough, transfer the risk, perhaps through cybersecurity insurance, though this is complex, or avoid the risk entirely, maybe by decommissioning a system. Concrete implementation plans for remediation or mitigation actions are typically documented in those plans of action and milestones, POAMs, we mentioned earlier. These track the identified weakness, the planned corrective action, the responsible party, and the target completion date. As actions are taken, key system documentation, like system security plans or network diagrams, must be updated accordingly. Any new or significantly revised security controls put in place as part of the response must then be formally assessed for their effectiveness and immediately integrated back into the ongoing ISCM program for continuous monitoring. It closes the loop. 6. Review and update ISCM strategy and program. And finally, the cycle repeats and refines itself. ISCM is fundamentally not a static, set-it-and-forget-it activity. It's designed to be a recursive process of continuous improvement. The overall strategy and the specific program elements, metrics, frequencies, tools are continually reviewed and refined based on operational experience and changes in the environment. Organizations need to establish robust procedures for regularly reviewing and potentially modifying all aspects of their ISCM strategy and program, questioning its continued relevance. The accuracy of the data being collected, the usefulness of the current metrics, the effectiveness of the reporting, and the appropriateness of the established monitoring frequencies.
What kinds of things would trigger such a review or update?
Several things can act as triggers. Significant changes to the organization's core missions or business processes. Major shifts in the enterprise architecture, like a large-scale move to the cloud. A formal change in the organization's risk tolerance mandated by leadership. The emergence of significant new threat or vulnerability information. Major changes to information systems themselves. Observable trends in POA&Ms, for instance, if certain types of weaknesses keep recurring or remediation deadlines are consistently missed. The introduction of new laws, regulations, or external reporting requirements. Trend analysis plays a key role here too. For example, Analyzing consolidated POANM data across the enterprise or reviewing patterns in audit logs over time can provide valuable insights that inform necessary adjustments to monitoring strategies or frequencies. For instance, if weekly assessments consistently show very few significant changes occurring for a particular set of controls, the organization might decide to reduce the assessment frequency to monthly to save resources. Conversely, if audit log reviews reveal a concerning increase in anomalous network events, they might decide to increase the frequency or intensity of monitoring for related controls. And remember that feedback loop between tiers. The output of ISCM activities down at Tier 3, the system level, serves as critical input to the ongoing implementation and refinement of ISCM programs up at Tiers 1 and 2. Observations made by system administrators can directly lead to changes in high-level organizational security strategies or policies. It's a true living feedback loop designed for continuous improvement and adaptation to the ever-changing threat landscape.
That whole 6-step cycle sounds incredibly thorough, but also like a massive ongoing undertaking. It almost feels impossible to maintain that level of vigilance, analysis, and response purely manually, especially in a large, complex organization. So how does technology actually help make this continuous monitoring practical, affordable, and, dare I say it, maybe even achievable for modern organizations? Automation must be key here.
You're absolutely right. Technology, and specifically automation, plays an absolutely pivotal role. It's what makes comprehensive ISCM not just practical, but essentially feasible at the scale and speed required today. The role of automation in ISCM is truly transformational. Automated solutions, first and foremost, dramatically lower operational costs associated with monitoring. They significantly enhance efficiency by performing tasks much faster than humans can, and they vastly improve reliability by eliminating the potential for human error in repetitive data collection and analysis tasks. Sophisticated automation tools can often recognize subtle patterns, anomalies, and complex relationships across vast data sets that human analysts, even experienced ones, might easily miss, especially when dealing with the sheer volume of security data generated across a modern enterprise network every single day. Critically, automation doesn't necessarily replace security professionals, but rather augments them. It reduces the significant amount of time they might otherwise spend on redundant, low-value tasks, like manually reviewing logs or checking configurations, and frees them up to focus on higher-level cognitive work, things like strategic analysis, complex problem-solving, threat hunting, and incident response coordination. Essentially, as one source puts it, automation makes security-related information readily available in an environment where ongoing monitoring needs change rapidly, allowing organizations to be much more agile and responsive.
When organizations are looking for these automated tools for ISCM, what are the key features or capabilities they should be looking for?
That's important. When considering specific ISCM tools, organizations typically look for several key capabilities. The ability to pull information from a wide variety of sources, network devices, servers, endpoints, cloud platforms, applications, security appliances, etc. The use of open specifications, like the Security Content Automation Protocol, SEAP, to ensure interoperability between different security products from different vendors. This avoids vendor lock-in and allows data to be shared easily. Seamless integration with other critical IT and security management products, such as help desk ticketing systems, asset inventory databases, configuration management systems, and incident response platforms. Strong support for compliance requirements, allowing automated checks against security benchmarks and generation of compliance reports. The ability to provide tailored reporting suitable for different stakeholders, from detailed technical reports for analysts to high-level dashboards for executives, and increasingly, the ability to consolidate and correlate vast amounts of data into centralized security information and event management, SIEM tools, and intuitive management dashboards for unified visibility and analysis.
Okay, so automation is crucial. What specific types of technologies actually enable ISCM? You mentioned different domains earlier. Can you break those down?
Absolutely. Let's delve into the various technologies for enabling ISCM. These are often grouped into what NIST sometimes refers to as security automation domains. You can almost think of these as interconnected segments of a wheel, with security automation acting as the hub that binds them together, allowing data to flow between them and enabling comprehensive insights to emerge. 1. Vulnerability and patch management. These are the core tools we discussed extensively earlier. They automatically scan hosts and networks to identify known vulnerabilities based on databases like the NVD, and they help manage the process of deploying software updates and security patches efficiently across the enterprise. Examples again include tools like Nessus, Qualys, OpenVAS, Acunetics. They proactively identify weaknesses and directly assist with demonstrating compliance for patch levels. 2. Event and incident management. This broad category involves continuously monitoring observable occurrences, events, in networks or systems, looking for signs of potential incidents. Log management is a critical subcomponent here. It encompasses the entire lifecycle of security log data.
Generation, secure transmission, long-term storage, sophisticated analysis, often using SIEMs, and eventual disposal. Logs are absolutely vital for auditing system activity, conducting forensic investigations after an incident, establishing normal baselines of network behavior, and identifying operational trends or potential policy violations. Routine, automated log analysis is really key to finding those early, often subtle signs of security incidents or compliance issues. Log management is a critical subcomponent here. It encompasses the entire lifecycle of security log data. Intrusion detection and prevention systems, IDPSs, are another key part. These systems specifically focus on identifying potentially malicious activity or policy violations in network traffic or on host systems. They log detailed information about suspicious events, attempt to actively block or stop attacks in real time in the case of IPS, and report critical alerts to security administrators for further investigation. They can often be configured to automatically respond to certain types of threats, like by dynamically changing firewall rules or terminating malicious connections. 3. Malware detection. These are tools specifically dedicated to identifying and reporting the presence of viruses, worms, Trojan horses, spyware, ransomware, or other types of malicious code. They operate at network entry-exit points, like email gateways or web proxies, on servers and directly on individual endpoint devices, laptops, desktops. They typically perform both periodic scheduled scans and real-time analysis of files and network traffic, and can often take predetermined actions like automatically quarantining or deleting infected files. 4. Asset management. As we discussed, knowing what you have is foundational. Asset management tools help maintain that comprehensive, often real-time inventory of both software and hardware assets across the organization. They track asset life cycles from procurement to disposal and can manage automated functions related to asset discovery, tagging, and tracking changes. Accurate asset data is crucial input for vulnerability management and risk assessment. 5. Configuration management. These tools allow administrators to define, enforce, and monitor security configurations across large numbers of devices consistently. They enable administrators to centrally configure security settings, like password policies or service hardening, actively monitor for unauthorized changes or configuration drift, collect detailed status information, and even automatically restore systems back to a known secure baseline configuration if deviations are detected. System configuration scanning tools are a key part of this, automatically checking systems for compliance against established, secure baseline configurations, such as the Federal Desktop Core Configuration, FDCC, or the United States Government Configuration Baseline, USGCB, used in federal agencies, or benchmarks from organizations like CIS, Center for Internet Security. This domain also includes tools for identity and access configuration management, ensuring user credentials, privileges, and access rights are correctly provisioned and managed throughout their lifecycle. 6. Network management. These capabilities, often part of broader network monitoring suites, include functions like automated host discovery on the network, maintaining a network inventory, implementing network change control processes, monitoring network performance and availability, and specifically detecting unauthorized hardware, rogue devices, or software operating on the network. 7. License management. While perhaps less directly tied to security incidents, this focuses on centrally managing software assets and associated licensing information. It helps organizations track compliance with complex software licensing agreements, monitor actual software usage to potentially optimize costs, and avoid legal issues related to unlicensed software use. Under-licensed critical software could also pose an availability risk if it stops working. 8. Information management, often called data loss prevention, DLP. This category encompasses tools and strategies specifically designed to protect sensitive information, like PII, intellectual property, or financial data, from unauthorized exposure, whether through accidental leakage or malicious theft. DLP tools, which can include network traffic analysis appliances, endpoint agents, secure web gateways, or specialized DLP software suites, actively monitor data in 3 states: at rest, stored on servers or endpoints; in use, being processed by applications or users; and in transit, moving across the network. They often have policies to detect sensitive data patterns and can trigger alerts or actively block suspicious data movement. 9. Software assurance. This domain encompasses activities aimed at ensuring the overall trustworthiness of software used by the organization, verifying that it doesn't contain known exploitable vulnerabilities, and that it executes predictably and securely according to its intended function.
This leverages automation specifications that help categorize and score software weaknesses, such as the Common Weakness Enumeration, CWE, the Common Weakness Scoring System, CWSS, and the Common Attack Pattern Enumeration and Classification, CAPEX standard, to systematically identify and address potential flaws during development or procurement.
That's a huge range of technologies all feeding into this ISCM idea. How does an organization make sense of all the data coming from these different tools?
That's where the next layer comes in the aggregation and analysis technologies. These are crucial for turning that flood of raw data from the individual domains into meaningful, actionable insights. Security, information, and event management SIEM tools are absolutely central here. These are sophisticated, centralized logging and analysis platforms. They aggregate vast quantities of logs and event data from potentially thousands of different information system components across the enterprise operating systems, application servers, network devices, security appliances, databases, cloud services, everything. But they don't just store the logs. Their real power lies in their ability to correlate events across these different sources in near real time, using complex rules and often machine learning to identify significant security events, patterns of attack, or policy violations that might be invisible when looking at logs from a single system in isolation. SIEMs help security teams identify and prioritize most critical events amidst the noise, and can often initiate automated responses or workflows. Management dashboards are also vital, especially for communication and situational awareness.
These tools consolidate and communicate key security posture information, often derived from SIEMs and other monitoring tools, in a visually intuitive, near real-time format. They are crucial for providing tailored views to different tiers of the organization. A dashboard for a system administrator might show detailed technical alerts and performance metrics for their specific systems, while a dashboard for a CISO or senior manager would show aggregated risk scores, compliance status, incident trends, and high-level metrics aligned with Tier 1 and Tier 2 concerns.
And you mentioned standardized formats like SCP being important for making these tools work together.
Yes, absolutely. Automation and reference data sources provide the standardized foundations that allow all these different technologies to communicate effectively and operate efficiently within an ISCM program. SCAP, Security Content Automation Protocol, is a key enabler here. It's not a single tool, but rather a suite of open specifications maintained by NIST that standardize the format and nomenclature used for communicating information about software flaws, security configurations, patches, and compliance checks. SCAP enables different security software tools, like vulnerability scanners, configuration auditors, and patch management systems, from different vendors to speak the same language, allowing them to interoperate, share data seamlessly, and automate processes like vulnerability checking, patch verification, compliance auditing against benchmarks like US GCP or CIS, and overall security measurement. NIST provides a validation program for SCAP-compatible tools and also maintains repositories of publicly available security content expressed in SCAP formats, like vulnerability definitions and configuration checklists. Interestingly, even for security controls that require some human interaction or judgment and can't be fully automated, SCAP includes a specification called Open Checklist Interactive Language, OCIL. This allows assessment procedures to be expressed as a standardized series of questions for a human assessor, with their responses then captured in a standard format that can be automatically processed, helping to bridge the gap between manual assessments and automated reporting. Reference data sources, particularly the authoritative repositories maintained by NIST, are also critical inputs for many ISCM tools. The National Vulnerability Database, NVD, is the primary U.S. government repository of standards-based vulnerability management data. It uses the SKP specifications and provides constantly updated information on publicly known vulnerabilities, including their CVSS scores, related software weaknesses, CWEs, and applicable configurations, CPEs. Tools rely heavily on the NVD data feeds, which are updated roughly every 2 hours to identify known vulnerabilities. Similarly, the National Checklist Program, NCP, provides publicly available security configuration checklists. These give organizations detailed step-by-step instructions for securely configuring specific IT products, like operating systems or applications, to meet a recognized secure baseline level. These checklists are often available in both human-readable prose and machine-readable SCAP Express formats, allowing tools to automatically audit system configurations against these recommended secure baselines. All these different technologies, the domain-specific tools, the aggregation platforms like SIEMs, and the standardized data formats and reference sources ideally integrate into cohesive ISCM reference models. NIST has published examples like the CSRS Framework extension, detailed in NIST Interagency Report 77566. These models promote the consistent integration of disparate security tools and provide a blueprint for how collected data can be aggregated, analyzed, and visualized to provide overall situational awareness for the organization. They typically illustrate that high-level data flow we discussed, starting from the initial security-related information gathered from people, processes, technology, and the operational environment, flowing through various stages of aggregation, correlation, and analysis, and ultimately delivering tailored intelligence and status updates to data consumers and decision-makers at all three tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. It's this complete interconnected ecosystem of tools, data, standards, and processes that truly makes effective, large-scale, continuous monitoring a powerful, achievable reality for modern organizations, transforming their security posture from being static and reactive to truly dynamic, proactive, and responsive.
What an incredible deep dive that was. We've really journeyed through the many complex layers of cybersecurity vulnerability management, from really understanding the granular details and maybe the limitations of CVSS scores, to seeing how strategic frameworks like NIST provide that essential comprehensive blueprint for managing risk, and then finally grasping the absolutely critical role of continuous monitoring, ISCM, and automation in actually keeping pace with the relentless tide of threats. It's just abundantly clear that managing digital risk effectively is a complex, multifaceted, but absolutely essential endeavor for survival, let alone success, in our deeply interconnected world. Hopefully you, our listener, now have a valuable shortcut. You're better informed about how organizations are striving day in, day out to identify, prioritize, and protect their vital digital assets in the face of these relentless and constantly evolving threats. It truly is a hidden battle, but one that directly impacts all of our daily digital lives, whether we realize it or not.
And perhaps to zoom out for one final thought, connecting this all back to the bigger picture. What we've discussed today shows it's not just about patching the latest vulnerability that hits the news, or simply reacting to the latest breach after the damage is done. It's fundamentally about building a living, breathing, adaptive security ecosystem within the organization. One that can not only withstand attacks, but can actually learn and potentially improve as a result of experiencing adverse events. This really raises an important, maybe provocative question for you to consider. In a world where we know vulnerabilities are inevitable, and attacks are a constant reality, how can organizations aspire to move beyond just resilience, which is merely the capacity to withstand shocks and recover afterwards, towards something more like anti-fragility? That's the concept where systems don't just survive shocks, but actually get stronger because of them, continuously learning, adapting, and becoming more robust with every challenge they face. Consider how embracing these structured frameworks like NIST, leveraging these sophisticated tools and automation, and fostering an unwavering dedication to continuous monitoring and improvement could shape not just an organization's immediate security posture, but its overall long-term ability to innovate, adapt, and truly thrive in an increasingly connected, yet inherently vulnerable digital world. It's potentially a profound shift in mindset, moving from defense to dynamic adaptation.
That's a fantastic point to end on, moving beyond just bouncing back to actually bouncing forward stronger. We certainly hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about and perhaps a new perspective on the hidden, complex, but vital battles fought daily in the world of cybersecurity. Until next time on the deep dive, keep digging, keep learning, and stay curious.